Good afternoon and welcome to the City Council Informational Meeting. The meeting will start in 60 seconds.
Good afternoon and welcome to the informational meeting for the Sioux Falls City Council on September 12, 2017. The first order of business is any City Council open discussion. Councilor Selbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick FYI that the Land Use Committee will not be meeting next week, so I thought I'd give a heads up on that. Thank you.
Very good. Also serves as a reminder that we will have the Annexation Task Force open house tomorrow afternoon and evening, 5:30 to 7, at the main library, rooms A and B. And that is an open house format. Any other items for open discussion? All right, very good. Then moving forward to our first presentation, Top 10 Projects. And Tom Huber, our Assistant Director of Finance, will present on this topic. Welcome, Tom.
Good afternoon, councilors. Appreciate the opportunity to, it's been a while since we've, again, Tom Huber with the Finance Office. It's been a while since we've provided an overview of as to what's been happening with the identified top 10 projects. So some of these have regular updates, others do not, so it's always good to step back and provide a quick review of the status of these projects. I'll start by recognizing the project team. They're in the third row behind me. Aaron Boffenkamp, Deborah Gaikowski, and Scott Greger. Very appreciative of what they do every day to keep these top 10 projects and many other projects moving forward every day. There are a lot of people out front and behind the scenes all making good things happen on these projects and many others throughout the city. First, you'll probably notice it's a top 10 project update, but there's actually 11 projects in here and now in the deck, so now you know why. This project is being replaced on the top 10, but just to finish it out from an update standpoint, this has been a big technology win for the city. This is the InterGov software project, allowed us to leverage technology to better serve the customers and make our teams more efficient and productive. The system has been in use since September of 2014 and really is a central hub for all land management records of the city, you know, from it's a data warehouse basically of all plan reviews, permitting, business licensing, zoning, and code enforcement activities. In addition to, you'll notice the online access for our customers. The software is having a significant impact on the city's productivity by allowing people in the field, the inspectors in the field, to use technology to enter the field directly into the software rather than, you know, using paper and coming back and having it entered in the office. So it gives them direct access, allows data sharing, and several other wins to make our teams more efficient. There will always be upgrades and enhancements to this software and the other software packages that we use. The online permit applications is right around the corner, and so the project tasks have been completed and the project has been replaced on the top 10 list. Next project is also one that put a check mark beside from the sense that it's almost complete, will be complete certainly by the time we give it the next update. Is the Midco Indoor Aquatic Center. And this was constructed on time and within budget, opened in October of 2016, And through August of 2017, we've seen attendance of over 209,000 people coming through the doors. Parks and Rec team continues to work incredibly hard to make sure that the indoor aquatic is a great experience, and also to minimize the impact on the taxpayer. So, he said the project will be replaced on the top 10 soon. The one last project task is really to have a one-year birthday party. That'll be October 13th through the 15th. Another top 10 project that is almost ready to be closed is the tobacco-free initiative. The city was committed to providing a healthy environment for our citizens and visitors. So a new tobacco-free ordinance was adopted by the council and has been implemented. Some additional signage is still in the works, and a press event will be held soon to recognize some of the wins from this project. So this project will also be replaced on the top 10 soon. It's another software project. Part software, part organization, part equipment, part process. A lot of different things happening with fleet management, but it's a good example of what we can do when we deploy new, modern, very user-friendly technology and combine that with hardworking and dedicated people. We've truly centralized the fleet operations with all fleet-related personnel now reporting into the fleet organization within central services. We have also successfully recruited a full-time fleet manager and another fleet supervisor. We have 2 fleet supervisors now. We're still working through some day 2 items on the software as we roll out the internal customer portal and some integrations, but the software is in full use and is already making us more efficient. Again, data sharing, tracking our usage, giving us better information, just allowing the teams to be so much more efficient. We're in the process of procuring and will then implement an integrated fuel software solution with this software. And then with the right personnel and the software in place, we'll move on to looking at our work processes and our equipment efficiencies to make sure that we're getting the absolute most from every taxpayer dollar. Another software project is the public safety software. This is what we can look at as really a great example of governments working together to provide a better service and better value to all the taxpayers of our community. The Public Safety Software Replacement Project has been a rock-solid partnership between the city, Minnehaha County, City of Brandon, and Metro Communications. We are implementing the Zerker suite of public safety software, which includes the computer-aided dispatch system, the mobile, jail, and records applications. The initial setup is complete, working through data conversions right now, moving into system testing and training, which is a pretty big task. And then from there, the next steps in this project will be to complete some parallel testing with our current system to make sure everything is working. And the plan is to go live probably in February or early spring of next year. An ancillary fire management reporting software has already been implemented. It's the Zoll software to give fire some reporting tools that will play into this new software as well. Public safety facility study. For simple purposes, I'll say we've hired WSKF to conduct an independent assessment of the public safety training facility, fire station replacement, utilization and service delivery, as well as police report to work locations. They said the firm has been hired. The initial team kickoff meeting has been held, and we are now in the data gathering stage of this project. Next up, consultants will be on site to further their data gathering and meet with the teams, again, to work through gathering all the information they need with the scheduled completion by spring of 2018. The City Administration Building, you just received a project update from Directors Quanbeck, Etten, and Turbeck last week that outlined that the project is on schedule and within budget. The steel and exterior framing is underway. Walls and windows will be coming soon with the anticipated enclosure of the building in November. Upcoming are some council and staff tours in October. And as I mentioned, the building is scheduled to be enclosed in November. Mixed-use parking ramp project. The schematic design has been completed for this project. Team is working through finalizing the developer agreements and financing plan, and will bring the complete package forward for council consideration and approval in the near future. Rail yard redevelopment. The redevelopment plan has been completed. Proposals have been received and initial interviews conducted. The next steps, the city will take possession in November. We'll have a city groundbreaking at that time. We'll begin to prepare the rail yard for redevelopment, and we'll select a development proposal or proposals to move forward in developing the property. Subdivision annexation. Several of you are on this task force. Councilor Kiley, along with Director Cooper, has been leading this effort to address pockets of unannexed land within the city limits and to guide the city on when and how to proceed with annexations. The task force has completed 5 meetings to this point. Public open house is scheduled, as mentioned earlier, for tomorrow evening, where the task force members and city staff will be available to discuss the draft recommendations that have been drawn up by the task force. The newest top 10 project that replaced the land management project that rolled off is the What Works Cities project. City is taking full advantage of the opportunity to work with Johns Hopkins University to strengthen our open data practices and make it easier to access available information on the city's web portal. So more on that to come soon. To stay current, we do have a top 10 project link on the website. Not all projects have frequent updates or have additional information that you can click through to, but several of them do. So to stay current, you can always access the website and click through and see where some of these projects are at. So I'd be willing to answer any softball questions. The hard questions might have to get some people from the project team to answer, but that you might have.
Anybody have any softball questions for Assistant Director Huber? Councilor Rolfing.
Yes, I do. Tom, on your 3rd page there, I've got 2 comments on both the 3rd and the 4th page. Number 1, fleet management. We had talked about integrating with Minnehaha and Lincoln County on this. I wish that would have been a bullet point, because I think it's an important thing to put down there to keep things moving there and to get the coordination down. So I would hope that that would be added to your to-do list on that one. And the same on the public safety facility study that the group coming in. Now this is Williams, Spurgeon, Cool, and Freshnug. I won't make any comments on that, but I understand why you use the initials. You could add Lincoln and Minnehaha County to that too, to see if there's some way we can coordinate. I'm thinking again on 911, I'm thinking fire, I'm thinking all kinds of things that would be good to at least keep them informed and say, if you've got anything you want done that you're thinking about doing in the next 5 years, we're doing a study now, let us know. And so I hope either that's been done or it will be done very soon.
Appreciate the feedback. Yes, we always want to work collaboratively with our other partners in government, and not just the counties. That includes like the public safety software accessing the state system, all of these projects. Right. Try to work with other governments to make sure that we're all working smarter and working more efficiently. So thank you.
Any other questions for Tom? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.
Appreciate the presentation. Okay, next item on the agenda is our Lewis and Clark bond refinancing item, and that'll be presented by Tracy Turbach, our Director of Finance. Welcome, Director.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Tracy Turbach with the Finance Office. Sales tax bond refunding. Now, if that title of the presentation isn't enough to get you excited, I'm not sure what is. This is really, really an exciting opportunity, and as mundane as the title of the presentation might sound, I'm optimistic that by the time we're done this afternoon, you'll be as excited about this as I am. At least I'm certainly hopeful of that. We've discussed on several occasions the upcoming opportunity for the city to call some of its outstanding sales tax bonds. In November of this year is that first opportunity. And it is truly a very exciting opportunity for the city, and in this particular case for our water system customers. The proposed refunding transaction will result in very, very significant savings to the water fund in the years to come. It will immediately reduce the amount of outstanding debt that our water fund has. It will pay off the balance of the remaining Lewis and Clark bonds 10 years earlier than originally anticipated when those bonds were first issued. I'll start with just in a nutshell, the basics of what a refunding or bond refunding is. And I think most of you folks really grasp the concept. I explained it in an email to you last week, but in essence, a refunding is where the city sells new bonds. We then take the proceeds from that new bond issue to pay off an old bond issue. And the motivation, of course, for that is that the new bonds will carry a lower interest rate than the old bonds. And it's as I mentioned in my message to you before, it's not unlike the motivation of a homeowner refinancing their mortgage. So because of that lower interest rate, the city saves interest expense. And in this particular refunding, we also plan to use available cash within the water fund to dramatically increase those savings. And I'll quantify those for you in a little bit. Finance and Public Works have been collaborating on this for some time now, but we have enlisted expertise from our financial advisors, PFM financial advisors, as well as our legal counsel from Perkins Coie. And Matt Schnackenberg and Bruce Bonjour are here today, and when I'm finished, whatever questions I can't answer or Mark Cotter can't answer, we'll have these guys answer the tough ones. So they're truly invaluable in this process, and we really could not accomplish a bond issuance without their expertise. So I want to walk through just very briefly the history and kind of provide you a status update on where we are with our Lewis and Clark bonds. The original bonds, or what we'll refer to as the old bonds, were issued back in May of 2007 for the purpose of raising $70 million for the city to make its contribution to the Lewis and Clark Water Project. At the time the bonds were issued, the true interest cost on those bonds came in at 4.43%, and they were intended to be paid off over a 30-year term, so the final maturity of the currently outstanding bonds is in 2036. The bonds were backed by the security of the second penny sales tax, but payments have, from the very beginning, consistently been paid from user fees generated within our water enterprise fund. So that's where this started. Currently, we have about $62.5 million of that $70 million still outstanding, so we've retired or paid off about $7.4 million. The bonds that are outstanding carry coupon interest rates that range from 3.5% to 5%. And as I mentioned, and this is really what provides this opportunity, the bonds were originally issued with a call date, early call date of November 15th, 2017. So that's coming up here in a couple months when we can have that opportunity to execute a refunding. What we're proposing in the plan that's before you is to issue those new bonds, 2017 A bonds, for the purpose, again, of paying off or refunding the old bonds that are outstanding. The principal amount of the new bond issue would be about $36.3 million, and we're estimating, based on current market interest rates, that our true interest costs on these new bonds would be somewhere in that range between 2 and 2.5%. The term on the new bonds we're estimating at 9 years. So that would put our final maturity at 2026. So we're taking 10 years off the term of the outstanding bonds. These new bonds would continue to be backed with that second penny sales tax revenue. However, the payments would continue to be made with user fee revenues, just as they have been from our water system fund. We are planning to use $25 million in available water fund cash to reduce the amount needed to be raised from that new bond issue. The use of this cash will drastically increase the amount of savings the city will realize from this transaction. I want to talk just a little bit more about that $25 million in cash from the water fund. Provide some perspective on that, because this is a very critical element to the refinancing plan. The current cash balance in our water fund is about $39.9 million, so that gives you a little bit of perspective of how much that $25 million represents to the fund. We have been, as I mentioned, collaborating with Public Works, and over the course of the summer, we've really been through a painstaking process on forecasting our future cash flow needs for the water system, looking at every element of future costs that we'll have for operating the system, purchasing Lewis and Clark water, future capital investment needs for the system, through not just the next 5 years like we typically do with our capital improvement plan, but actually through 2036. So for the next 20 years, we've looked out and anticipated what our future cash flow needs will be. In that process, we've looked at really countless different scenarios and have jointly come to the conclusion that the forecast model that we're using is just very, very solid. We also engaged the expertise of PFM, and they've been through our forecasting model and have worked with us on that to kind of validate the process that we're using and the forecasting methods that we're using as well. So Finance and Public Works firmly support moving forward with this refinancing transaction as we're proposing to you. As part of that forecasting model, that cash flow forecast, we have established a target operating reserves, a cash reserve within our water fund to meet unanticipated expenses or unanticipated shortfalls in revenue that might occur over the next 20 years. And our target range is 20 to 30% of the operating budget. So you're accustomed to talking about the general fund reserve of 25%. This would be an operating reserve in our water enterprise of between 20 to 30% of the operating budget each year. And we are projecting, based on that cash flow model, that if we execute this transaction, we would end 2017 well within that range. In fact, the cash flow forecast that we've identified, our water fund will stay well within that range through 2023, which is what, about 6 years, 5 or 6 years, and then at that point it will begin to trend upward. And that's really a key issue for our Public Works team as they look forward to identifying that next source of water for the city of Sioux Falls. It's important to understand also from your perspective that the future capital needs in the water department will rely entirely on our cash flows. So we do not anticipate any additional borrowing in our water fund to meet those capital needs. So with this refunding transaction, then the water fund would be debt-free at the end of 2026. Again, that's just 9 years from now, and that's, as I say, that's really a key consideration for the Public Works team as they begin to identify where our next major water source will be. It will position the city very well to identify and execute on whatever that next major source of water will be. For those of you that have been around for a while, that were here when the Lewis and Clark not necessarily on the council, but certainly paying attention to the Lewis and Clark project. You might remember that there is a true-up, a final true-up with the Lewis and Clark project that the city will have an obligation, and we have accounted for that as well within our cash flow forecast. So we do anticipate somewhere in the mid-2020s where the city will have a significant obligation to lay out some cash to true up our final costs for the Lewis and Clark project. So we really have, in collaboration with Public Works, covered all the bases in identifying how much cash we could put into this transaction. So how much will this transaction really save? And I want to show you a graphic. It's the only graphic I've got in the presentation today. And what I'm trying to do here is compare the net debt service payments, the principal and interest payments of the old bonds, and compare those with the principal and interest payments of the new bonds. The blue bars on the graphic, and this runs from 2018 on the left through 2036 on the right. The blue bars represent our current obligation to make payments on the old bonds. So if we do nothing at all, those are the annual payments that we'll be making for the next 20 years. And you can see those bars are just under $5 million. It's about $4.8 million per year for the next 20 years. The gold bars represent the principal and interest payments on what would be the new bonds. So you can see that for the first 5 years, we'll actually have payments that are lower than the current outstanding bond issue, and that difference then from the top of the gold bar to the top of the blue bar represents annual savings in 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22. And then we have about 4 years where our payments are the same under either scenario. But then with the new bonds, they stop. They will be paid off. That's 2026, and that's when our final payment would be made. So every other payment under the old bonds is avoided from 2027 through 2036. All those payments will be avoided under this refunding transaction. If you take those savings, the dollars that are associated with the savings in those first 5 years and the savings from 2027 through the run out of the old bonds, and you add all those dollars up, that adds up to over $50 million, $50.2 million in principal and interest payments that are avoided. But it's important to remember that part of this transaction would involve putting $25 million in cash on the front end. So in essence, we're using $25 million today to pay down the debt, and in return for that $25 million outlay today, we would avoid $50.2 million in principal and interest payments between now and 2036. So when you net those two out, it really translates to about $25.2 million in lower payments for the city over the course of that time. Does that math track with you folks? And again, I think what really jumps out on this graphic is what I've said a couple times now, that these bonds the new bonds would be paid off in 9 years. So in 2026, we would make our final bond payment in the water department. The water fund would be debt-free at that point. That's, again, 10 years sooner than if we choose to do nothing. So those savings are really enormous, and I think that tells you why I'm so excited about this opportunity that we have, and I really believe you folks should be too. Again, so after considering the $25 million in cash, the future principal and interest payments will be reduced by more than $25 million. Now, we all understand the concept of the time value of money. Many of those dollars that we'll save don't actually get saved until future years. So it's important to look at that through the lens of the time value of money. And that analysis has been done, and the present value savings in today's dollars of this transaction as we're proposing would be $14.4 million. So that on its own really tells you what the economic savings is when you consider that those dollars in the future that we save won't be worth as much as they are today. So it really takes into account the time value of money. Well, how good is that? Is that a significant savings in the overall scheme of things? $14.4 million. And to provide maybe a little bit of perspective on that, there are industry benchmarks that are often used when when looking at refunding or refinancing an outstanding bond issue, that's typically the savings are measured against the amount of outstanding, the old bonds outstanding, and that's measured as a percentage of the bonds outstanding. And I know historically I've heard 3%. I think more recently people look at 5%. If you can get 5% savings, you ought to be looking pretty hard at refinancing. A really good refinancing might get you 10% savings. This transaction, the present value savings would be more than 23% of the old bonds outstanding. That's like getting a 23% discount on repaying our debt. And again, the drivers of those truly massive savings are, one, the lower interest rate. So the new bonds will have a lower rate of interest than what we're paying on the currently outstanding bonds. We're shortening the term by 10 years. They'll be paid off in 2026 rather than 2036. So that translates into huge savings. That's a major part of it. Clearly, the less time we have outstanding bonds that we're paying interest on, the less interest we will pay. And then utilizing that $25 million in cash will significantly reduce, obviously, the amount of debt we have outstanding. Again, that's, from my perspective, the savings are just truly phenomenal. So looking at the path forward then, how do we get there? How do we accomplish this? And as always, the city cannot issue bonds without the approval of the city council. And that applies for refunding bonds as well. Even though we're not increasing the overall amount of city debt, the council still must authorize the issuance of these bonds. And that approval, of course, is granted by ordinance. And the bond ordinance that will be on first reading tonight does several things. One, it authorizes the issuance of those new bonds. And it sets the parameters on the new bonds, and any bond ordinance that the council's ever approved in the past always sets the parameters, the maximum amount to be set, the maximum interest rate that we will pay, the longest term that we might consider. So those things are laid out as maximums within the ordinance. And it's important to note that the parameters in the bond ordinance that's on first reading tonight are different than what we truly expect. So we allow some room above what we really expect the true interest rate to be when we're done. We allow additional time for the final maturity so that if things shift in the market a little bit and we have to add a year, for example, onto the final maturity, we don't have to start the entire process all over again. The last thing I would mention that the bond ordinance does is establish the uses of the bond proceeds. And so it will limit the use of the proceeds purely for the retirement of the old bonds. All the proceeds will have to be used to retire the bonds, pay the cost of issuance, fund a debt service reserve fund, and that's an additional security for the bondholders that will eventually be utilized to make our final bond payment. And then if there's any capitalized interest, it would pay for that as well. So next steps, I mentioned the first reading of the bond ordinance is tonight. Second reading and adoption of the bond ordinance would be on September 19th. The bonds would actually be sold through a competitive process, which the city has traditionally found to be most favorable in terms of achieving the lowest interest rate. The new bonds would be sold sometime in late October, very likely, possibly early November. And then just as soon as we had the new bonds and the money in the bank, we would call the old bonds so they could be paid off. To summarize then, this is really, from my perspective, an opportunity that few city officials ever get to save the equivalent of $14.4 million in today's dollars in one fell swoop, one transaction. And really, from your perspective, this ought to be the easiest decision you ever make as a city councilor. This is really, there is no downside to this. And with that, I will stand by for questions, and I know Matt and Bruce are happy to answer any questions you folks have. I do want to thank Mark Cotter and Dean Borkart. They've worked a lot with us on this, particularly in cash flow forecasting and determining what their future cash flow needs will be. And Tom Huber has really been indispensable in getting us to this point. So with that, what questions do you folks have?
Okay, questions for Director Turback. Councilor Rolfing.
Thank you for this well-done presentation, Tracy. It's very good. I have a couple of questions. So number one, the numbers in my accounting here don't add up. We got to pay off 36.3, and we're going to take 25 million from the fund. That adds up to 61.3, but the amount we got to pay off is 62.5, almost 6. The bottom $1 million difference there is that coming out of your pocket, or?
Yeah, no, I was going to pass the hat, see if I can get you to kick in a little bit. No, the payment, the $62.5 million that's currently outstanding, that includes the payment that is due in November. Those dollars have already been set aside in trust, so that principal payment will be made out of those dollars, not out of the $25 million that we're proposing.
Okay. Last one then, the 14.4 million, when you amortized that, what interest rate did you use?
Matt, can you tell me what we used to?
Yeah, it's about 1.90%.
Okay.
1.90%.
It wasn't 5 or anything like that, so no, it was conservative about what we're going to get. Just checking, just wanted to know. Thank you.
Very good.
And just to make sure everybody heard that, 1.90% was the response. Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, this is, I would say, as I was thinking about this is almost like taking an interest-only arm that converts into like a 20-year mortgage with a so-so interest rate and converting it into a 10-year traditional with a great interest rate, more or less. So it's pretty fantastic. I do have to ask, so the current cash balance in the water fund is about $40 million, but you have $25 million you can put down, so there's a lot of money in the bank. Where did that come from, and what was all that money going to be used for? Was that going to be used to pay the original bonds when they ramped up, or?
The additional dollars and the 25 that we feel like we can put into this transaction didn't accumulate overnight. It's certainly something that took really years to accumulate that balance. Really is a result of, I think, a number of factors. One, we have been anticipating this call date for some time, so we've been anticipating that we would utilize cash to pay off some portion of the bonds. The ultimate true up with Lewis and Clark has also been a consideration, knowing that we will have that true up that comes due someday. And if you rewind 10 years ago to when the bonds were sold, there were truly a lot of uncertainties as to what that was going to mean to the financial performance of our water enterprise. We didn't know necessarily what the Lewis and Clark water was going to cost. As it turns out, it has cost less. I think our operational costs overall today are less than what we were anticipating when we joined Lewis and Clark, and that has certainly contributed to that cash balance that's accumulated, that we're spending less overall on the operation of our water system, as well as capital projects. I think Mark will tell you that some of the future water supply projects, they've had the luxury, I suppose you'd say, of not having to do those as soon because of the quality of the Lewis and Clark water, the quantity that we've been able to obtain through the Lewis and Clark system, the changes that the water department has made so that they can utilize the Lewis and Clark water really throughout their system, have all contributed to operating at a much lower cost than what was anticipated. And with that, I'll stop. And I don't know, Mark, if I've missed anything that you wanted to add on as well, did I?
Good afternoon, City Council members. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. I think Tracy really netted it out well at the beginning. 10 years ago when we started to right-size this utility and at the very beginning stages to sell the Lewis and Clark bonds, there was a number of uncertainties that we were managing against. One of the key ones that we all started with all the utilities was to actually create an operational reserve. In many of the utilities, there wasn't a substantial amount of cash to effectively run them, and so we established a 25% reserve target. So whatever that previous year's budget was, we should always have that amount in in the bank. Consequently, the council also did that same action with the general fund. We also, at the time, were funding almost all the capital projects that had any size to them with SRF loans. So even a small neighborhood water project, we were going to the state revolving fund loan and getting a loan to do that work as opposed to doing it with cash. So we wanted to get up to a point so we could cash fund some of those. We actually created a reserve that said 15% capital. So we could get up to at least 15% of our projects we were going to be able to fund with cash. We've got this utility healthy now, and so we can no longer need that reserve. So we're going to, going forward, that'll be a reserve that we don't carry. So that provided some cash on hand. The other factor that Tracy brought up was rate stabilization. We knew that when the leaders back in the 1990s were in your seats and made that decision to move forward with Lewis and Clark, nearly 25 years later, in 2012 is when we started to receive water. We didn't have a good idea of what that water was going to cost, so we started to budget accordingly, but then we created what we call the rate stabilization fund, that as Lewis and Clark got on its feet and started to produce water, we wanted to have, if they had any rate corrections, we wanted to have a reserve fund that could manage through that and not have a negative effect on the customers. Lewis and Clark's water has been very affordable and it's been very stable rates, and so we no longer need that reserve either. So the collapsing of going from 3 reserve accounts down to 1 has provided dollars. Operationally, we have over the last 10 years accumulated dollars because we'll budget and then ultimately some of those costs come in less, whether it's electricity, chemicals, wages. Over time, over a 10-year period of time, that has generated almost $20 million in accumulated cash. And then as Tracy said with the capital, I know you guys all know that we're doing the aquifer study with USGS. That's a 4-year intense study to understand how our aquifer works in a healthy period and in a drought. So we've delayed several of our large horizontal collector wells until we have that study. So that has pushed that out. Last, the Lewis and Clark true-up, just understanding with what our needs are, our water system is, we've been able to move that projection out 2 more years. So there's been a number of factors. A lot of things have come clear. The finance team has really done a nice job guiding us through how we get kind of right-sizing this fund going forward. Okay.
Thank you, Director. Councilor Neitzer?
One more related to that. So then going forward, that makes sense, but going forward, are rates where they should be, or are they too high?
Going forward, at this point in time, the near term looks like our rates are in the right spot. One thing that, as we further study, this water source today takes us through about 2044. And so if you look at that point in time, say in 2020, we take a real close look at what our growth is going to be, and ultimately the length of time it takes to develop a new water source, which is 25 years. At that time, I think we'll do another deep dive for the community and really consider establishing a reserve to fund the next future water source, just like Lewis and Clark. And so I think those are some things to come. Because likely, one of the benefits of Lewis and Clark is, we're very fortunate to be connected to the Missouri River, one of the largest water basins in the country. And it's also been very good, affordable rates, is that it's also had significant federal funding in it. And potentially our next water source won't have the degree of federal funding that this water source has. So I think that that's the uncertainty, I think, with our next water source. But the city of Sioux Falls right now is sitting very good and has very stable water sources.
Okay. Councilor Selber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'd agree with Director Turback. This is a very exciting proposal. It kind of seems like a no-brainer. I'd go back to, just to reiterate, so there's no downside or risk to any of this. It's, as they say, some things, if it sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, that was a concern coming here today, that they're, you know, what is it that you're not telling us? But I guess there's risk to anything, but certainly the risk of doing nothing, the risk of not doing this is far more certain and far more severe than whatever risk there is to following through with it. Mm-hmm. And you'd have to look very, very hard to find a downside to this.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the one other thing, for the average citizen, knowing that their rates are going to be stable over the long term, I think is as good a news as the refinancing and the exciting part about the numbers part of it. But the other thing that I wanted to point out too is the other thing that we're doing tonight. We're also approving the bond council payment as part of the contract. That's part of it. So that's part of one of the things we're doing tonight as well. So
that's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Staley.
Okay, a question about that second penny collateral situation. What would happen if we didn't use the second penny?
Well, I can give you my answer, and then perhaps Matt, our financial advisor, can provide an even better answer. But essentially, we utilize that second penny as leverage or as security when we issue bonds, even though we don't intend to use those revenues to repay them, purely for the purpose of getting a higher bond rating and a lower interest rate. And so it will save us money. And I don't know, Matt, you want to add anything else to that response?
Well, hold on, if I could ask, if let's just say we weren't, okay, let's say this is our second penny right here. Okay, we got the second penny. My concern is we have that already pledged to some percentage of debt that we Tracy, if you would. And so now if we're having this involved as a backup, what does that do to the second penny? Because that you have to consider that in spending the second penny. Am I correct in budgeting with the second penny? At some point we have to say, yes, we have this obligation, you know, that needs to be there in case of a failure, apparently. Otherwise, why would we even be putting it up there? So I wanted to know, what does that do to our second penny? I mean, what percentage of the second penny then is pledged? We have to have something left for you to take a hold of it in case there's I don't know what would happen that people quit paying their water bills, or I mean, how would that even ever kick in?
I can try that one. Yeah, and it's important, I think, first of all, to understand that second penny pledge is there today on the existing Lewis and Clark bonds.
So I understand.
So we're not adding to that. In fact, we're actually reducing the amount that will be pledged against the second penny.
But the second penny seems to be changing. I mean, the second pennies coming in are diminishing. So we've got that happening. So how does that, when you have X amount of money coming in, you've pledged X amount to pay back debt, and then you got this other part of it that is used as a backup, a second signer, then how does that affect the usability of the second penny moving forward? Because I would think you're going to say that a certain percentage of that has to be protected. Is that right? Yes. Yeah, so it's almost like it's pledged to pay back debt, even though it's not. I mean, it has to be there.
It is pledged for the repayment, but we do not set any second penny dollars aside. We don't not budget those dollars because we have that pledge outstanding. So from a budgeting standpoint, we don't allocate or lock up dollars of the second penny because we have this pledge against these water bonds. The water fund is fully capable and has proven that it's fully able from a financial perspective to support those bond payments. And in fact, it's going to be even more capable in the future because those bond payments over the next 5 years will be lower than what they would otherwise be. So we're actually reducing the level of risk on that there might someday be some situation that happens that we have to use second penny dollars to pay these bonds. And I don't know what that would be either. I mean, if all of a sudden people stop buying water.
Exactly, I mean, that's what I asked.
I don't foresee that happening, but that seemed like that would be a very remote possibility.
So why would they even ask for us to have the second penny? I mean, what's even the, why can't we just have, we have the water coming through, people are using it, we have a certain population here. Why even have the second penny?
Sure. As
Matt, would you please identify yourself?
yeah, sorry. Matt Schnackenberg with Public Financial Management, the city's financial advisor. As Tracy alluded to earlier, the second penny sales tax backing is a stronger credit than what the water credit would be. And so there's interest savings you're going to get from having that stronger credit.
Okay, any other questions for either Matt or for Director Turback? Councilor Neitzer.
In regards to the true-up, it's been a while since I looked at that. Are they going to take the total costs of Lewis and Clark and apportion it based on how much we're using, and then we have to, you know, if we've paid, let's say, 70 in and they apportion us at 90, we got to pay another 20? How does that work?
There'll be a calculation based on what the cost of the system was to build, but the key additional cost that the city of Sioux Falls has when we asked for additional water required additional wells to be put in. And so when we need those additional wells to be put in, if we owe the system dollars, then we'll have to do a true-up. And that right now we have an estimate in our financial model of $8.5 million for 2026, and we'll see if that time frame and amount comes true. That's on the conservative side of the range that we've looked at.
Okay, and finally, in regards to Lewis and Clark, how much is harvested from, how much do we harvest versus do we get from Lewis and Clark on maybe a percentage basis, day to day? And then what's cheaper, us to harvest it or to buy it from Lewis and Clark?
So in the last 3 years, Councilor, we have averaged anywhere between 51 and 55% of our water is Lewis and Clark water. And they have a current rate structure that you pay essentially a flat fee for your 25% that you're allocated to take every day. We're required to take just over 2.7 million gallons a day. We typically buy from Lewis and Clark 12 to 16 million gallons a day. Okay, and so once we get past the essentially $2 per thousand threshold, which is our contractual minimum, then the rate drops down to 68 cents per thousand. And so that calculation, then the more you use, brings down your effective cost per thousand. And so if you don't look at some of our our overhead and some of those aspects and the capital, I mean, it would be I would just tell you what we actually sell the water for and what we can buy Lewis and Clark water. It's a factor of one of our expenses to deliver water to the entire city. And I don't think it would be appropriate for me to say, well, if we just look at Lewis and Clark water without capital, without operational costs, without some of the debt service payments, it wouldn't be appropriate, if that's fair.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, just to come back to that second penny again, Tracy. I'm just asking this to educate myself because I know we're talking about that with the parking ramp, using this as collateral. I personally have had a mortgage on my house. I've had people who maybe want me to be a second signer on something, and you talked about using a personal experience equating this to paying down loans within our home. So I'm just wondering, is there at any point when we start using the second penny for collateral on projects that we have to limit it? We say we can't do this anymore, or is that just an unlimited number of dollars that we can have and just say we've got our second penny here, even though we're going to be using 75% of it on street repair? Are we limited then to only pledging 25% for the backup collateral, or don't those things have any relevance to each other?
Yeah, there are a couple levels that we cannot exceed in terms of the the share of our second penny revenue stream that can be pledged for bond payments. The indenture that the city has requires us to maintain 1.5% coverage or 150% coverage. So whatever our annual bond payment is or is pledged from the second penny, we have to make sure we've got at least 150% of revenue from that second penny to cover that. So they want a bondholder that's holding one of those bonds wants a lot of security that they aren't going to get shorted on next year's bond payment because revenues take a little dip. So they want a 50% cushion there. The city council some years ago went a step further and said we think 200% coverage ought to be appropriate. So they've gone all the way up to 200%. So what that means is that the most, according to the council policy, we would ever pledge on sales tax dollars would be 50% of what our revenues are. So that would provide 200% coverage. So that's a very, very conservative approach. We're currently, I think, somewhere around 25%, give or take. I don't recall off the top of my head. But.
Have you ever heard of municipalities where they've used the second penny and it's been called, that they've had to, something's fallen apart and they've had to start using that as the payment?
I guess I can't think of any municipalities that have found themselves in that situation, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions for anybody on this topic? Okay, seeing none, that completes our agenda for this afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for attending. This meeting is adjourned.